Welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to show you in detail on how to make a custom patch loom for your D series Honda so that you can run a standalone ECU with the factory engine harness. Now, if you've been following this build, recently we turbocharged my car and also James, my mate's car, with the exact same turbo kit, and between us, it's been absolutely flawless. We've had zero mechanical faults, and yeah, we really give this a hard time on both the road and track. When I take this to the track, we double enter this car. So it's pretty much 4 track days with not a single issue. Now, I'm not saying that this is gonna last forever, but a modern standalone ECU like the Haltech I've got in the Civic will go a long way in keeping things alive. That said, currently on the market, there is no off-the-shelf option for the D16Y4 P2K engine harness. And since the ages, people have been doing the OBD1 conversions. So they swap over to a D16Y8 engine harness. They do the OBD1 distributor, and I think the idle control valve, just to run an Honda S300 chip in an unreliable 30-year-old computer. But this video will solve that problem. At the cost of about $100 and a few hours of wiring, you can have full control over the D16Y4 engine with the factory engine harness. So in this video, I'm going to share my spreadsheet of the complete pinout. We'll make the patch loom, we'll put it in the car, and then we'll go and see what the Haltech software can do. Let's get into it. To make this patch loom, here are the parts you're going to need. So first, you're going to need the AMP 34-pin plug-in pin set. So you can get these from Haltech, and this ECU connector goes into our main connector on the Elite here. So a lot of ECU manufacturers have now adopted this style of AMP plug. So these are really easy to come by, but I'd recommend getting the genuine one. Next, you're going to need an ECU header. So this is the part we're going to need for our P2K engine harness. What people have done is cut the pins at the back here, unscrewed it from the board, and this will pop straight out. But you're going to destroy this ECU pretty much. So I have found, after hours of research, an ECU header on the shelf. So this is a 3 receptacle version. I'll throw up the part numbers on the screen, but you can also get a 2 receptacle version like this one. And this was about $30. The reason why I chose the 3 receptacle version is because I have this extra receptacle there, just for future's sake. They're about $30, so not bad at all. And to connect the ECU header to our AMP plug, we're going to need some cabling. So the cheapest and easiest way to do this is to find an engine harness and then extract the cabling and then give it a good clean. And here you have a variety of different colors. So this came from a Honda harness, and we have a few different colors here which will match some of what I've got up on the spreadsheet and the factory engine harness. So this is a good idea. I do recommend anything between 14 gauge to 20 gauge. So with sensor wiring, generally 20 gauge is fine. So this is a bit of Raychem. And for power and grounds, I'd recommend something a bit heavy duty like this 14 gauge. Now, heat shrink, I do recommend this style of heat shrink. So this is an adhesive lined heat shrink, and inside this heat shrink, it is shiny and there is glue inside. So once you heat this up, it'll conform to whatever you've got inside this heat shrink, and then it dries up rigid as well. So this I got from Element 14. It's not exactly cheap, especially for heat shrink, but I can highly recommend this compared to your average heat shrink. Here I've also got a 3M Scotch lock and a spade terminal. If you want the ECU to have a secondary control over the thermofans, we've got a wire running to the C101 connector, and we'll use a Scotch lock to tap into that part of the relay. So yeah, to make this a bit neater, you also want to use a few Deutsch connectors. So the first one being this 4-pin DTM connector, which you can actually get from the Haltech wideband 1. So I got this pre-wired from the Haltech wideband 1 kit. We've got our power and ground wires, which I'm running to accessory power in the car, and then the CAN high, CAN low wires, which will go straight into the ECU. So this makes things a whole lot easier, but if you need to, you can just buy the DTM-4 plug. Next, I am also adding an 8-pin DT connector for our MAC valve boost control and also the sensors. And yeah, and the last thing I want to show you guys I had this little enclosure 3D printed, and I will have a few of these on the website too. So this ECU connector, once I've chopped the pins off, will sit in like this. So just keeps all the cabling inside here. For this video, I'm going to be using some general wiring tools. So I've got wire strippers here. This is an open barrel crimper. I actually got this pair from Haltech, but I'm sure you could get away with some standard pliers. This is my new soldering iron, which I bought from AliExpress. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool actually. I have never used it, but I'm pretty keen to try it out. Some solder and also a heat gun for our heat shrink. That's all you really need. So here is my completed spreadsheet of the patch loom. I'll throw it up on the website as well with some information, and hopefully that'll get you going. So for the next minute or so, I just want to help you navigate the spreadsheet because we've got a little bit going on. So on the left-hand side, column A, we have our 34 pins on that AMP plug, and column B would be each of those connections. Column C and D is where each of those wires are going to, so either on the ECU header, could be the Deutsch connectors, or also the C101 connector on our factory body loom. And in column E is just a bit more information so you know what that wire is doing. In column F, I've got the colors of the wires there. I believe I did this to match the factory engine harness, so if you want to, I guess, color code your patch loom to the engine harness, here are your colors there. And on the right side of the spreadsheet, we've got the factory pinout on the bottom. So those two ECU connectors, ECM connector A and ECM connector D. And I've also got diagram for the AMP plug. Just quickly on the bottom, we've got our two Deutsch connectors. So the DTM-4, just remembering we are getting 12 volt accessory power. And I do recommend getting this from the vehicle. So you can get it from the cigarette socket, or to do it properly, you could probably get it from the fuse box of the car. But it has to be switched 12 volts, so not constant power. Pin number 2 is for the ground, so any chassis ground, and pin 3 and 4 is the can high and can low signals going to Haltech pin 16 and 17 on our AMP plug. Next, we've got the 8-pin Deutsch connector, which we're just adding to make things a bit neater. That would be for the MAC valve. If you choose to use a flex sensor, that'll go there too, and also a temperature or pressure sensor. So that's the spreadsheet I've been working off, and if you have any questions, just let me know in the comments. Let's make the patch loom. So first we're going to prepare the ECU header for wiring, and if you turn it over on the back here, we'll need to straighten out all of these pins and then cut off what we don't need, and then we can make a few markings for orientation. So now we've got the pins relatively straight, we can go ahead and cut off most of that pin. So I'd leave about 15 mil on the end of it. All right, so I have straightened all the pins. I've also cut off just the top row of pins, and I've got a good length to work with because we're going to be soldering our wires onto these individual pins. Remember, we're just using 2 of these receptacles. Connector A is 26 pins and connector D is 22 pins. So I'm just going to mark it out just for my own sake. A over here and D. And because we also need to know the pin numbers, you can go back to the spreadsheet and match up the pins to this connector. So pin number 1 on the A is over here, 13 on this side, again pin number 1 and 11. Connector A, connector D, and if you flip it around, we'll go the same here, A and D, and we'll have pin 14 and pin 26, and pin 12 and 22. So that'll give me a good reference and save a lot of headache. So now we can start soldering our wires to the pins, and I want to point you to the spreadsheet. Now, some you will notice are combination pins, so using battery ground as an example, pin number 10 on the Haltech ECU going to pin 14 and 15 on our A connector on the ECU header. So coming back to this ECU header, you'll see that this is connector A, pin 14 is this pin. We can just go ahead and bend those 2 pins together and solder a single wire for the battery ground. Just a note here, with the battery grounds and the signal grounds, they are separate. You do not wire them together, and if you mix those up, you're going to have a whole lot of issues. So all you'll do is simply bend those 2 pins together. Just going to use some pliers to help. And let's put some solder on them. All right, so I've got a dab of solder on there, and now we're going to solder our battery wire onto those two pins. I'm going to take off about 15 mil. And you can see that this conductor is quite thick compared to your average sensor wire. Add some solder to that wire, just a coating of solder. Place the wire over the two pins and just heat it up with some solder there. So once that cools down, you're gonna have a good connection there. So that's done. I'm gonna flip it around and just add just a little bit of solder on the top side, just for that extra cohesion. All right, so I've just realized that was out of focus, so we are gonna do a second example, and I've chosen another combination pin, so ECU injector power, which is a 12 and 13, and these are A connector pin number 13 over here and number 12. So again, we're going to bend those together. So I've chosen this red wire. It is also another 14 gauge wire. Take off the end, about 15 mil. Add a bit of solder first to the pin. A dab of solder also on the wire itself. All right, so just heating up the solder. Like that. Letting it cool down. And there we go. That's the wire in. And I'll flip it around, add some more on the other side. And just like that, we've got our power and ground to the ECU via these two cables. And what I'm going to do now is just go ahead and do the rest of those pins on this ECU header, and then we'll come back and put some heat shrink on it. So just over an hour later, and we have all of our connections soldered into our ECU header. And I've also spent some time just going back and forth between the spreadsheet and this ECU header just to make sure I've got the right connections. You know, at this point, you really should double check and triple check your connections because later down the track, if you have made an error, it's just going to be a headache. We're going to go ahead and start protecting the ends of those pins because these are exposed at the moment. There is a risk of some sort of continuity between pins and shorting out. So what we're going to do is add heat shrink to each of the wires that we have soldered in. I'm going to show you how. This is just some adhesive line heat shrink. I've cut up a whole bunch, and what you're going to do is just run it down the wire to the base and push it all the way down into the header. Just like that. So you've really got a pretty well protected connection there. What I'm going to do is just with my heat gun, if you look closely at the top, you'll see that some of that adhesive is still drying. And once this cools off, the glue will line the insides of this heat shrink as well. So I'll throw up a photo of that. You can't really see it on camera. It's just that extra step with some good quality heat shrink, which will give you the maximum adhesion and give you a good connection. All right, guys, well done. If anyone is still watching, we are on the home stretch, so hang in there. The next part of this is very straightforward, but again, it's quite tedious. We have to go back onto the spreadsheet and then pretty much just figure out where each wire goes to our AMP plug. So all of these cables are going to end up in the AMP connector. What we need to do is strip the wire, and then we can crimp on one of our pins and then find and match the relevant connections and literally just insert the pin into the connector, and that'll really get the car going. I'm just going to get into it and show you how to do one of these crimps. So let's start with Haltech pin number 3, and that is going to A21 on our ECU connector. So we're just coming back to connector A. 26, 25, 24, 23, 22, 21 is our this wire. This is the wire going into pin position number 3 on our AMP. So just grab the wire stripper, strip off the end. You don't need too much. Let's go with this one. There we go. So that's the, I'd say about 10 mil. This is where you're going to need the crimper, or if you want to dodgy it, I will not show you how to do that, but I've done it before. So just grab one of these pins. So you'll see on this pin, you've got the open barrel crimp over there, and also the crimp for the insulation. Now's a good time to get out your set of open barrel crimpers, and you just insert it into letter D, so D, like that, and we're going to be starting off with the front crimp. So you can still see the rear of it sticking out over there. Grab your wire, insert that into the pin, and then just a squeeze, and that will be it. Now this is the main crimp onto the wire, so give it a pull, it should not come off, and then you can go ahead and do the back crimp. Bit of a squeeze, and that is secure. Just for the sake of this demonstration, we are going to insert that into our plug. So you'll see here, there are these numbers, number 1 right over there, and you got number 3. So number 3 is the pin we are going to insert into. Make sure the connector is unlocked, so you'll see these white tabs sticking out. You grab that wire, we crimped, find number 3 position, and just push it in. All the way in, you'll be able to see that seated at the bottom of the connector. And that's literally number 3. So I'm going to pull it out, and we're going to do the rest of these, and then we can start inserting the pins. So this next part is optional, and I'm not going to go through it in this video because everything we've done on the patch loom so far is going to give you full control over the engine. What I'm doing now is I'm adding flex fuel, so the flex sensor, the boost controller, and also a fluid sensor into the patch loom. This is really individualized to each build, so it doesn't make sense for me to go through the video, but if you want to look at my pinout, go back to the spreadsheet, and at the bottom you'll be able to find where each wire is going to. And look at that, we've got our 8-pin Deutsch plug hooked up to the patch loom, got our pins, all the outputs, ready to go into the AMP plug. So we've got, I think, about 24 of those, and we've also got the main connector for the CAN bus network with those 2 CAN wires ready to go into that plug as well. Inserting the pins is really going to be the last thing to do. What I want to do now is show you how I just finish off these patch looms. We've got some of this adhesive line heat shrink and a bit of braid here. It's just a bit of cheap braid you can get off eBay. I've used it on lots of harnesses before, and they do a really good job just to prevent any scuffing on that insulation. So what I'm going to do is insert, first of all, our braid. Just be careful not to separate the strands in the braid too much, otherwise it's irreversible. You have to get another piece. So I've got those in there, got it sitting like this. Going to measure up my heat shrink, so I'm going to cut some of this off. Say about this is enough, and we'll get, so the first piece I'm going to put over and insert all the way to the bottom. Just be careful with the heat gun. If you heat up this braid too much, it will melt. So you really just want to keep the heat on the main part of the heat shrink. And once you move closer to the edges, you just, bit of heat, come off it, bit of heat, come off it, so you don't damage that braid. You want to leave at least 2-3 centimeters at the end of this, because we're going to end up having to insert those pins. Alright Good morning guys. It did get quite late last night, so I finished the harness off and I wanted to save the checking for this morning once I've got a bit of sleep. So the harness is completed and I want to stress the importance of checking everything. So I want to show you how I'm going to do that. Again, I've got my spreadsheet there. I've got my multimeter, and if you turn your multimeter on to the continuity, some of them will have a sound function too. So it just makes things a lot easier to check. And what I'm going to do is going to check each pin coming to this AMP plug, and then we can chase each wire by locating where the pin goes to. So let's start with, I'll show you just this, I'll just show you this quickly. So we'll start with Haltech pin number 1 is the DP02 going to our MAC valve output, which should be on the 8-pin plug on pin number 1. So we have continuity there, and then you just keep moving down the list. So we have 34 to check. Won't take very long. I'll quickly get that sorted. The 2 connectors on our engine harness will go into here, the Haltech on here, the MAC valve and the sensors, and this wire is going to go into a Scotch lock onto C101 pin 7, which is the thermofan control. And this is just going to be going to the wideband. Now these 2 wires, the red and the black, are for accessory power and also chassis ground. And that's it. This is plug and play. So let's go and install it into the car. So first let's connect up the engine harness. 2 connectors. 1, 2. And then we'll connect up the sensor harness and the MAC valve. Coming off that part, we've got here a wire from the ECU, the DPO, a digital output from the Haltech, and I'm going to use this for a secondary fan control. Now if you want to do this, you simply grab the C101 connector, identify pin 7, and it is the green wire, and I simply just put a Scotch lock T-tap into it, and I've put a spade terminal here, and it just connects up like that. And that's it for fan control. Then we're going to move on to the 4-pin connector, which is our main CAN bus. This is my wideband connector. I'll plug it straight in. And because the wideband does draw a bit of amperage, we have external accessory power and also a ground. So I'm going to put the ground onto the chassis first, just on the bottom there. And our red wire for accessory power. Now for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm just going to twist the wires together. Next, just connect up the Elite ECU. And then we have a vacuum line for the onboard map sensor. And that's it. That is how to link up your ECU to the D16Y4 P2K harness. What I'm going to do is tidy this up, and then we'll jump into the software and have a look at what this can do. This afternoon we are going for a drive, and I want to show you how the Haltech Elite runs the Civic. Now for a car built for the track, we're currently in winter and we are running straight E85. This performs really well on the street. It's one thing to have great top-end performance, but it can also be a pig to drive on the road. And part of running a standalone ECU is having all the fine control over the engine to get things right. When you get things right, it's an absolute pleasure to drive on the road. So a huge thanks goes to TuneLab Racing, Fernando. I can highly recommend him for all your Haltech needs. So I thought we'd go for a drive and then we can pull over, have a look at the software, and show you all the cool things you can do. Let's go. Alrighty. We'll go for a drive first, warm the car up, and then we can have a look at the ECU. It's quite cold at the moment, so we'll just warm the car up. Believe it or not, I drive this car a lot, and yeah, it just gives me a smile every time. You know, all those turbo whistles. Yeah, it's wet at the moment. Alright, do a little pull for you guys. It's actually wet at the moment, so. I love this guy, give me smiles every time. I forgot to mention, these patch harnesses, patch looms, I will be keeping 1 or 2 in stock, and then from then they're going to be made to order. So if you're interested, let me know in the comments and I can have one ready for you guys. They're not going to be cheap. Part of this video is going to show you that they're not exactly quick to make, and you're paying for my time and experience. So yeah, let's stop over here. All right guys, we are in the software, and let me get this out of the way. So, all right, so just connecting up to the ECU, and for the last couple of minutes of battery life left, I'm going to show you what this ECU can do. So to get your car running, especially just to get to the dyno, all you really need to configure are these engine configuration settings. So your trigger system, your fuel system, and the ignition system. Once you have those settings dialed in, the Haltech will spit out numbers onto the tables, and you should be able to get the car running, at least enough to get to the dyno. And I'm not going to be sending out my base map, guys, or my map. Make sure you contact TuneLab or whatever tuner you prefer to use. Yeah, let's just go down the tree and have a look. So with sensors, this is currently what I've got hooked up at the moment. I've got the map sensor, air temp, coolant sensor, coolant temp sensor, the wideband, vehicle speed for our launch control. But I've also got the oil pressure and oil temperature it's hooked up. It's just not configured at the moment. So if you look back at the IO report, you'll be able to see all the different outputs we have. And yeah, we've pretty much exhausted everything on this ECU. So going down to fuel tuning, this is where you can dial in your volumetric efficiency tables. Down to our engine functions, we've got the throttle, we've got the fuel pump controlled off the DPO. We've also got the idle control hooked up. It does need a bit more tuning at the moment. I'm trying to play with that, but it's kind of out of my scope. And I've also got the thermo fan hooked up. So you can see here, the thermo fan 1, you can see that green light's just turned on. So when it gets to, I think I set it at 93 or 92 degrees, the ECU will bypass the fan switch and switch those fans on. You can see that temperature rapidly falling. We've also got our engine protection wideband set up. Got the limiter overboost cut, which is set at 14 PSI. And decel function, which I don't actually know what that does. So yeah, I forgot to mention, this is running the Haltech wideband 1 kit. We've got it set up in closed loop tuning, which means that at any given point in time, you'll see here our wideband will make corrections for our target lambda. It's really important, especially if you were at wide open throttle and all of a sudden you've got an injector which isn't functioning properly. It could actually just add fuel. It'll make corrections on the fly and hopefully save that engine. So we'll just come down to engine functions. At the moment, just got our launch control set up. So that's pretty cool. Haltech CAN system, you can also go and add in a dash. You can go set up another keypad, that kind of thing. OBD2, which we won't be able to support with the 550, given that we have only one CAN port, and for the 550 we have only the data logging on the computer. So that's pretty much all I wanted to show you in the NSP software. Now, if this video was helpful at all, please let me know in the comments, leave a like, and please consider subscribing. If you want to check out the website, I've got the patch harness there. I've got some information about the pinout, and grab a t-shirt if you want to support the channel. So that's all for the video. I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next one.